are very welcome to today's first session of day 4 on design thinking, a self-awareness journey in 6 phases. So I have posted a Mentimeter link on the chat box for people who have just joined us. And it's a very, very simple question. Please do take the first couple of minutes just to click onto that link and answer this question. As part of a self-awareness exercise, what do you think your greatest strengths are? It will be very valuable information for our evaluation team to have whenever we're writing up our future skills week report. So yes, as you are doing that, I will make a start on the introduction. So we are absolutely delighted to have Jessica from Big Motive in with us this morning. And Jessica will be looking at design thinking in the next 15 minutes or so. And then I'm sure, Jessica, you will be more than happy to answer some questions from our students. Perfect, thank you. So design thinking is about human discovering and creating innovative solutions for humans. So we had Big Motive in with us last year, and the students have raving evaluation on Big Motive. And again, we are absolutely delighted to have Jessica in with us this morning. And Jessica has have 20 years experience in this in design thinking, and I believe that you have just recently finished an MBA thesis on the relationship between design thinking and organizational resilience. So me personally, I'm really looking forward to hearing more about that. And Jessica, I know that you have your slides ready to go, and I leave the introduction to yourself, if that's okay. Because
no problem.
Yeah, because I took a sneak peek on at your slides, and there's a lot more to it. So I'll let yourself do the introduction if that's okay. So Jessica, do you mind sharing your screen?
Yeah, let's do
Need any
it.
help?
Let's see here how we did it last time. What's this way? Hello, everybody. Hope you're having a good day so far. Can you see that okay?
Yes, I can indeed. And guys, just to let you know, at any point if the audio drops or the internet is not playing ball, please do let us know in the chat box and we'll try and fix it if we can fix it, that is, just before we ramble on and on, okay? Oh, someone put their hand up.
A couple of them.
Yeah. Oh, lower hand, that's okay. So yes, also throughout Jessica's session, if you do have any questions for Jessica, please put it in the chat box. We might not be able to get to the questions straight away, but I will remind Jessica throughout the session if she can answer the question there, and then if not, don't worry, we will come back to the chat box at the end. So feel free to put your questions into the chat box. Okay, Jessica, thanks for waiting. Over to you.
Thank you so much for the kind introduction and welcome everybody. And of course, yes, I'll have some time at the end I've saved for questions, curiosities, and ideas that you might have based on what I'm going to be talking to you about, which is, as you said, design thinking, but from a different perspective, looking at it through this self-awareness journey and how we might use it to improve our things like self-confidence, self-awareness, leadership skills, and so forth. So once again, welcome and congratulations, I guess, making it to day 4. I can't believe it. It's already Thursday. What is happening? So really well done. A little bit more about me that I'll go ahead and share with you, a bit more on a personal note. So yes, I've been working with design thinking for around the last 20 years or so, which I suppose would put me into being about as old as you were when I first started with design thinking and was just introduced to it in my schooling. And I've been working with it now for 20 years, and I also use it in my personal life, which is part of the reason why I'm here talking about it with you today. But professionally speaking, I'm a learning design lead for a company called Big Motive, and I'll talk a little bit more about them just because you might be interested to know what we're up to and what sorts of things we do with design thinking. But again, on a more personal level, I am a puppy and a plant mommy. I'm from Minnesota in the US. So you probably could tell from my accent, I'm not from Belfast or around here. You'll typically find me sipping on matcha, although this morning I have my smoothie because I haven't eaten yet today, so I've been working on that. but I'm also like to binge K-dramas and very questionable reality shows to kind of take my mind off of work and things. Right now I'm watching 39 for my K-drama is the big one. I'm watching a few actually, but that's the big one. And then my questionable reality show I'm watching is Below Deck Down Under. So if you're interested in some questionable reality TV, hit me up and I can give you some recommendations. So by the end of today's session, I suppose in the next 45 minutes or so, I'm hoping to get you to understand the design thinking as a process, but also as a mindset, which is really what's going to unlock some of the magic for using it as an awareness journey. Understanding each of those phases and how you might use that to build your self-awareness, and then also really recognizing how that mindset will lead to building the self-confidence. That's probably the big key and the big takeaway here. So I'm going to do that in 4 parts. We're going to go a bit into what is design thinking. So for those of you who are not familiar with it, I'll give you a little bit of an overview, a bit of a background into understanding it well enough to finish this journey out with us today. Talk about some of the elements of the mindset itself, just how do designers think, how do design thinkers think, and how does that help the process? And then those 6 phases as sort of a framework and help you understand how to use those in your personal lives, but also could be useful in your professional life and planning that as well. And then of course, by the end, we're going to bring it all back together, start talking about what's next, what are some of your ideas on how you might employ this, or what are some things that you need in order to get started, okay? So I hope that sounds good. I know people are not being super active in the chat, so I won't make you sit and wait for people to say, yeah, that sounds great, let's go. I'm just going to plow forward. But again, if at any point you have a question or a thought, please pop it in there and we'll definitely get back to it, if not right away, by the end. So let me tell you a little bit about Big Motive first and how we use our design skills. Our mindset is that we use design to do things like be more people-centered, bring solutions to very large problems or disruptions within society, and we like to do this collaboratively. So we often say that we make change together. And typically when you hear about design thinking, you do hear about it being used in a team form, but that's not to say it can't be used individually. And the nice thing about it is, again, it's being used in our case as a way to change the way things are and make them a bit better, make them a bit more accessible to everyone, make it so that people feel like their voice is being heard or their needs are being met. And we've done this with several different clients, but we are a very small team. Of course, we're proudly based in Belfast, but we work on a global scale. We've actually won Ireland Design Awards multiple years running and things like that. So we're just like movers and shakers. So we're a small but strong team. We have a lot of diversity on our team. I'm from the US. We have a gal from Brazil. We have people from Ireland. We have people from Britain. We have people from everywhere. I think it's 8 different countries it says here. And among us, we speak 14 different languages. Which is an interesting point because that diversity is actually really helpful in the design thinking because it means we're bringing together different perspectives and different ideas, okay? So I want to ask you a question. Again, I recognize we haven't been very ready in the chat. Maybe we're still waking up, not too sure yet. But if you can please bring yourself to the keyboard and get into the chat and type an answer to this question. What comes to mind when you think of design? And there's no right or wrong answer here. I'm just asking, when I say design, and then you have a pause, what is it that you think of? Go ahead and type that in the chat if you could. And keeping in mind that design can function at multiple levels in multiple ways. I'm seeing lots of hands going up. I wonder, do they have access to the chat? Is it maybe something where we can't get them to participate there?
Guys, if you try to open the chat box, the little speech bubble, you can type into the chat box. Have a go at that. Or maybe one of you is on mute because there's lots of hands going up.
There's tons.
Okay.
If somebody, David, the David #2, you've put your hand up. Is there an issue? If you can unmute and let us know. The hands are going, but
I've caused chaos already.
I love the
I mean,
chaos. I love the chaos, Jessica.
I appreciate the participation, but this wasn't what we were planning for.
That's
And the
no.
only reason for that, folks, is because I want to give you all a chance and an opportunity to speak. And I'm afraid if we just do one by one voice answers, it's just going to be a bit too much.
Yeah.
So
Yes,
that's
I can
okay.
see hands are going up, but there doesn't seem to be anybody been in the chat bar. I've put in the chat bar. In order to open the chat bar, if you go to the bottom right hand side of the screen, you'll see a little purple tab with two white arrows pointing left. If you click on it, it says Open Collaborate Panel. If you then click on the little speech bubble, it'll open the chat for you.
Yeah.
Nope, we're okay.
I'll give you all a second and see if that solves the
Sorry,
problem.
Jessica, could you repeat the question, please?
Yeah, well, we've got it up here on the board as well. So
Oh,
if you
sorry,
do,
God.
yeah, that's all right. So what comes to mind when you think of design, folks? If you can put it in the chat, that would be fantastic. Instead of raising our hands, go ahead and put it in the chat.
Okay.
Well, that's all right. I'll probably go ahead and move on then, and that's okay. Typically, the answers that we get around design are things like, when I think of design, I think of artwork, or when I think of design, I think of like pictures, pretty pictures, creativity, and things like that. Although every so often we'll get a couple of people who go, well, I suppose you have to design experiences. For example, when I go to the museum, I think of how someone designed the whole layout, or when I go to a gallery, I think of how, oh, see, it was disabled. I knew it. I thought so. It's like, there's a reason they're all raising their hand. All right, well, now that the chat's working, go ahead and I'll be quiet. What comes to mind when you think of design? Creativity, great. Creation, yes. Individuality, interesting. Creativity, problem solving, interesting, okay. Creative, lots of creation in this. Yeah, that's about right. So I think it's pretty typical. What we want to keep in mind, just for the case that we're going to be running through today, is that design can function multiple levels in multiple ways. And I'm going to show you this graph, and it's going to be a little scary for 9:45 in the morning, but please don't fret. I'm going to explain to you why it's relevant, and you don't need to memorize this for a test or anything like that. It's essentially just to show all the different ways and the levels at which design can function. Because for most of us, when we think about design, we think about that information box. You all see that information box to the left. That's what everybody is thinking about. They're thinking about the thing that's created, the thing that we see. Maybe when you're walking down the street and you're looking for a street sign to figure out which way to go, that's the type of thing we think of when we think of design. But there's actually higher complexity levels. So as you go from information onto products, for example, so now we're talking about your digital tools. We're talking about your cell phones. We're talking about the apps on your phone. We're talking about the mouse that you have on your desk. Any of those things are products that have been designed. Even the chair that you're sitting on is a product of design as well. Okay, someone thought about how that needs to be created. For example, I have a special mouse where I just give it a little handshake to hold it, and it's meant to eliminate or possibly prevent carpal tunnel, which I'm really worried about for some reason, although I don't have the symptoms. So, but it's a great design on that mouse. Then you move on to interactions, services, okay? This is magical. This is where design is invisible, but very much a tool. These types of things are things like going to a restaurant. Someone comes and greets you, they bring you to your table, you sit down, someone takes your order, they bring you your food. You enjoy your meal, you go home. But think about all the things you didn't see. You didn't see them looking at their table layout to go, where can we put them? You didn't see them go and enter your meal in. For those of you who have ever maybe waited on tables, you know the drill. They didn't see you go and put this into the computer system to send the ticket back to the chef who's going to cook the meal, makes the meal, the person who brings it to your table. They don't see all of those things. That's also a design. Yeah, exactly. The Design of Everyday Things by Don Norman is a fantastic book, and it describes a lot of this in depth. So this is, again, a higher order thinking. But then you have the even highest order thinking of design, which is around systems. And in this case, we're talking about cities, we're talking about organizations, but we're also talking about transformation. That's the higher order thinking that can be assisted with design thinking, that can help us become a bit more self-aware, come up with some different ideas and ways to walk through life and show up. And so that's the part we're going to be talking about. So the reason I go through all of this is because, again, typically everyone thinks of creation, creativity, even just developing things. They kind of think about information or products, but we want to take it even further. Okay, so that's the only reason I show you this. So now if we sorta, maybe, we're just being introduced to this whole 4 orders of design, how is that different than design thinking? So let me just tell you, design thinking is this cluster, if you will, of different approaches where people kind of pull things together, find answers to complex challenges. And of course, as you're walking through life, the challenges that we encounter are not always very complex, but you're dealing with human behavior, which in and of itself is complex, okay? So originally this was inspired as a way that professional designers just work, but it doesn't mean that it's just something that designers do. Everyone can learn how to do design thinking, including yourself. And it can be very useful, not just for creating winning business models, but it can also be a mindset that guides you through some of your toughest challenges. So think of design thinking as both a process and a mindset, okay? It's ideal for building up that self-confidence, which leads to transformation, okay? And I think probably at its core, the reason design thinking is something that I've found works really well is because at its core, design thinking is about humans. It's the reason that this mouse fits the shape of my hand instead of making my hand fit the shape of the mouse. And so because it has humans at the center, what better way for us to come aware of ourselves as humans than to use a framework like design thinking? So let me tell you how we might do that. There are some successful ingredients to design thinking. One of them is a beginner's mindset, thinking about things as if it's brand new to you, as if it's alien, because what this does is basically remove some of the bias that we might have. And I'll get into that a little bit more later. There's also, because it's a process and a framework for change, innovation, those are things we might be trying to do again in our lives as we become aware of challenges. How can we overcome these adversities? How can we transform ourselves into the person that we would like to be, or whatever you're thinking about in that way? It also provides a bit of a mental space that we don't often allow ourselves, which allows us to use the creative parts of our brain. Designers, creatives, artists sometimes are seen as like this unicorn of sorts, where it's like, oh, they're just so creative, as if it's some sort of thing, special thing that they have that nobody else has access to. But in reality, it's just about us giving ourselves over to that part of our brain, to that space in our mind. And so there's ways to build on that mindset and harness that creativity, solve your problems, improve your circumstances. And then lastly, and this is very interesting when we're talking about ourselves, you want to have a desire to empathize, because again, design thinking is all about humans. So it's all about empathy. And you might be thinking, well, yeah, it's me. Of course I'm feeling how I feel. That's what empathy is, right? I'm feeling how I feel. But sometimes we feel how we feel. Sometimes we recognize how we feel, but we don't actually feel it, especially when it's a difficult feeling. We sometimes acknowledge it and move on. We don't actually sit in it and process it and allow ourselves to deal with it. And so we have to be willing to sit in those uncomfortable spaces, to be brave in our own vulnerability. And that allowance can come from a structure or framework like design thinking and its process. So the other thing I want to say around here too is that the design thinking process can be very misleading, This is not some well-defined sequence of steps. You are not on some, like, what's his name, Tony Robbins or Brene Brown journey here, where it's like, this is a self-help workshop and we're going to go step by step on all the ways that you can do this. It's not a linear thing. It's actually very iterative, meaning that you might have multiple different tries at a certain thing. So you might find yourself bouncing back and forth between the different phases, coming up with new ideas when something doesn't go as planned. This means it's also incredibly important to be gentle and patient with ourselves, which is something we don't often afford ourselves to do either. Don't forget, your behavior is completely under your control. So is changing yourself. So you might just need a new way of thinking, and that's where the design thinking can come in. Whew, that was deep. Okay. So this is Tim Brown. He is essentially like the godfather of design thinking. He works with a company called IDEO, fantastic group to look at if you're curious more about design thinking and how it's employed. He has this book called Change by Design, which I would highly recommend. And the quote that I've selected from that is, to experience design thinking is to engage in a dance among mental states. And I really love this quote because not only is it quite a beautiful metaphor, but also it gets us in the right mindset, which is a playful one. Oftentimes when we come across thinking about challenges, we get to a very serious place. But in actuality, you want to be ready to dance. You want to be ready to move around quickly, gracefully, and be able to continue even if you make a small mistake. So let's talk a little bit about these design thinking mindsets. Let's also just look really big picture. What the heck is a mindset? Well, mindsets can probably most easily be defined as just a set of attitudes, behaviors, values, and so forth. And I think it's really important to understand how design thinking works as a process. But again, what we are most interested in first is how it influences our mindsets. Because design thinkers have, I would say, about 5 attitudes that they use to foster innovation. They might have more, but these are the core ones that I'm pulling out for the use today. And the reason I use these ones is you might also see overlaps in these attitudes among different presentations you've already seen in the past. Things like growth mindset, leadership development, positive self-imagery, things like that. So it's nice to see them in a different context and maybe through a different lens. And the first one is human centricity, and we talked about this. This is the core of design thinking, the basis, if you will. And so this means an awareness of in this case, right, because we're talking about ourselves, this means an awareness of yourself in all the ways you show up, okay? Before you can figure out how to solve a problem or even initiate some sort of transformation in your life, you'll want to identify and empathize with yourself. What is it you really need? And that's a tough question because don't always think of that. We're even taught sometimes that that's a selfish thought. But you're empathizing with yourself. When you're looking to understand why you do what you do, you have to be curious. You have to have an open, non-judgmental attitude around yourself. And this is tough. I mean, like I said, I've been doing design thinking for 20 years. I've probably applied it more and more in my personal life in the past 5 years or so. But it's tough not to have that non-judgmental attitude. But that attitude is so key when you're looking to understand yourself and just accept yourself as you are, unleashing that synergetic creative energy that you're looking for, solving your challenges and building up self-confidence along the way. So human centricity, that's the very first one. That's probably the core. As we move in, it's thinking about this as an explorer, okay? Because you're looking at researching this problem. You're trying to research the problem so you can really be good at describing what's going on. Because there's a lot of times where the problem is not that we can't solve the problem. The problem is we can't identify the problem. So design thinking uses an explorer spirit or research to aim at deeply understanding what that challenge is, helping you really find solutions that are going to create motivation behind overcoming these adversities or these challenges. So I would love it if you could, imagine design thinking as a journey, a bit of an adventurous expedition, maybe into a jungle or deep into the sea, wherever you'd like to be in your own mind. But you don't know much about it. So a lot of the things are very unknown behavioral rules, unknown dependencies that you've not ever thought of. And so just like a researcher, design thinkers are driven by curiosity, exploration, bravery, but also fact-driven nature. So that's where that research really comes in. Also, like a researcher, design thinkers' working styles are pretty much going through cycles of collecting findings, figuring out insights, interpreting those insights, verifying assumptions and hypotheses. So if there's any scientists in the audience, you can probably recognize a lot of that from thinking like scientists through scientific method and things. It's not really much different, okay? What I will say overall is that it pretty much requires a certain level of persistence. And there was one piece of advice that I received from someone early on in my career, which is persistence trumps talent. People who are persistent at things, who will continue to try over and over and over again, will often be as or more successful than the people who just have the natural talent to figure it out. Because you might look around thinking, oh, it's so easy for so-and-so. They just walk through life like they own it, right? But if you persistently go after yourself feeling like you can walk through life like you own it, you will get there. You will get there. And the other things you want to keep on are patience, because sometimes that persistence requires more effort on certain things than with others, but also honesty with yourself. Is this really something that I want? And that's where self-awareness on this journey can be so, so important. You also might find gaps, like why you're not able to do something as easily as someone else. And this whole comparison thing is really, really tricky. You don't want to do it. But I say it because I know we all do it. But when you're identifying gaps between your journey and somebody else's, just acknowledge it. Map that system, map that relationship, map those connections, create it as its own challenge, bring it on, and see if there's a way for you to narrow that and make it so that it's easier for you to keep moving. That's what an explorer would do. If an explorer is looking to get to a particular area, they're going to figure out how to do it. If a storm comes, a storm comes. They either wait it out or they go around it, okay? So that explorer spirit is quite important as well. Yes, 99% perspiration, 1% inspiration. So the third one is similar but different, which is learning through experimentation, okay? Design thinking has a learning style with a bias towards action. So like it says here, design thinkers love to try things, but not afraid of failing. And we even put it in quotes because there's a value when things don't go the way they planned. Now we know that doesn't work, and possibly we know why, okay? So experimentation, again, really advocates this iterative or agile approach. And the value of the experiment when it doesn't work, again, can just simply be, okay, cool, now I know that doesn't work, let's try this other thing, and it's no big deal, all right? And when we get into the process, you'll see how that's a little bit easier to say when you're using something like a design thinking framework. But I want to give you an example of somebody who, again, was very persistent and who, again, looked at their failing and went, well, how else can I possibly achieve this goal that I had? So here's this guy, JayZ, you might know. He really wanted to release a record. He thought, I am going to make this work. This is going to happen. How do I do this? And it was the 90s. So rap was becoming more mainstream, but every single record label turned him down. They told him, you're too old, you're not hard enough, you don't rap about drugs or crime, how are we going to sell your records? So instead of just saying, well, I guess I can't be a rapper, he said, what if I try my own record label? Can I do that? What does that entail? And now, looking back on it in retrospect, it makes it sound like it happened very simply overnight, no problem. But of course he faced challenges. Of course he found things that worked and things that didn't. But he persisted and he found ways around the storm. And so now, fast forward, him and Beyonce are worth like $900 million. The majority of that is his. And when he was being interviewed on how in the heck did you go from someone who had complete and utter rejection to someone with all of this clout behind your name, his quote was, "The genius thing that we did was we didn't give up." And now he's a rapper, songwriter, record executive, entrepreneur, media proprietor, record producer, and actor, instead of rejected. So again, he, had to experiment through that. I'm sure it wasn't easy to just like come up with a record label and release your own album, right? We all know that wouldn't be something you can just do overnight. And he didn't use design thinking. I wish I could say he did. But he probably harnessed a lot of those same mindsets. And possibly, who knows, the framework that he went through could have been something very similar. I would be surprised if it didn't include parts of it. So a couple more mindsets here. The last two. One is embracing uncertainty. This is a very interesting one because you're going into uncharted territory. Even though it's yourself, you're exploring a part of yourself that maybe you're not familiar with, especially if you're not used to being vulnerable, especially if you're not used to examining your feelings. That can be very new. That can, again, feel like a brand new world that you're entering. But what design thinkers should not be is afraid of surprises or unclear situations. Instead, it's about like getting comfortable with that, because those can be very informative. So it's not even like, oh, I'm just going to tolerate this crazy thing that came up and got in my way. No, I'm actually very comfortable with ambiguity. Being able to just sit back and see what's going to happen can be very, very informative. It's like watching people when you go out to like a coffee shop or something like that. You're kind of just observing and seeing what happens, but you're not interfering or interacting at all. Things like incomplete information where you're not really sure and you need to go back to the research, contradictions when you're working on a challenge that doesn't really have a predictable outcome, all those things are around the design thinking mode. And it basically just requires you to be able to move around the process. That's why it's not linear. That's why you might go back and forth. I'm curious, do we have any, now that the chat's working, give me a thumbs up or a yes. Do we have any scientists in the audience? Anyone who's studying science or in the science field, or even, I suppose, the medical field too? Yep, we've got one, Magnus. Okay, great. Or even anybody who's done an experiment recently. We've got a few. So does anybody want to be brave? Can they unmute themselves? Is that a thing? Let's try it. Does anybody want to be brave and raise their hand and tell me, when you're performing an experiment, what's the first thing that has to happen? Or you can type it in the chat if you're not feeling that brave, is fine too. What's the first thing you do, maybe even before you start the experiment? You need the ingredients. Yes, true. Maybe before that, plan a method. Yep, you've got to figure out how you're going to do it, a visualization. But even before all that, idea, believe it will work. Oh, I like these answers. Have a result in mind, maybe. I don't know. I'm not a scientist, to be fair. I was thinking, there it is. Is it Moira? I think I'm saying that right. I'm so sorry if I'm saying that wrong. Have a problem to solve. That's the first thing. Once you have that problem to solve, then what do you need before you start the experiment? Starts with a plan to solve it. Yep, so we talked about method. Good. Hypothesis. There it is. It's the magic word, hypothesis. All right. Yes, yes, yes. And I love how you wrote this down as well. Have a hypothesis and test if it is correct or not. So when you're writing that hypothesis, you have no idea how it's going to go. Not until you test it, right? And so this is that mindset of embracing uncertainty. It's basically, I have an idea of what I think will happen, but I won't know until it actually happens. And sitting in that space of, it's cool that I don't know. And that space is a weird space, because all throughout school, and I was a teacher as well, all throughout school, we're teaching kids, we're taught as children, have the right answer, right? So it's a weird space, but that's exactly right. Have that hypothesis, sit in that weird space of, it's cool that I don't know until I test it. All right, perfect, perfect. All right, so last mindset, openness to possibilities. And this kind of goes along with that same thing, because the objective of a design thinking challenge is discovering new, innovative solutions. So you're going to have to stay open-minded, right? You're going to have to be conscious of multiple options, more than one way to break an egg, for example. All the different pathways, always willing to explore the alternatives to give yourself, in our case, the best possible outcome. The other thing this attitude helps us with is something that we all typically do, which is jump to conclusions very, very quickly, because the solution seems right there. In fact, talking about comparing ourselves to others, we'll look around at what other people are doing, because that's what we have, that's what we do as humans. I lived in Korea for a while, and the first thing that I did was look around and see, what are the Koreans doing? Oh, they're doing this. Okay, I'll do that too, because that gave me a clue or an indicator of what is supposed to be happening. In this context, when you're trying to transform yourself, build self-confidence, build self-awareness, that word self, you can't look around for that. So you want to avoid jumping to what you think the solution might be too quickly. And by remaining open to all the possibilities, you're going to be able to do that. I've just shared with you 5 different mindsets, which are deep. They're not easy. I've compared a little bit of them to science, which can be helpful, because thinking like a scientist in a way can be quite helpful, but it's still a stretch. Okay, all these attitudes are not going to be easy to employ, but now that you kind of know what to practice embracing, we can look at the process side and see how that will help us be supported. Okay, all right, let's keep on trucking. Well, that didn't really work very good. That font looks funny. So the phases of a design thinking process is what it should say. And keeping in mind that it's not strictly defined to a process, it goes back and forth. What you really need to do is just embrace the right mindset and then use this structure or framework to get yourself started. Okay? You don't have to follow these steps. And again, it's not step by step. You might go back and forth. But just understanding the intention of each of these phases and being able to adapt or change the steps to whatever you need is completely the reason why we're here. It looks something like this. It's not a standard operating procedure. There's a lot of different ways to describe what's happening in a design thinking process, but if we were to look at it from a bird's eye view, there's a couple of things going on. You have your beginning, your start, and you have your solution at the end, right? But then you have 2 big phases or 2 big pieces of land that you're crossing, and one of them is the exploring the problem space. That's on the left side, the blue one. And then you have your discovering the solution space. That's on the right side. That's the green one. The reason that you see this line going through them that's going up and down and back and around is because, as I said, as you're moving through these spaces, you might find you need to go back in the process to redefine the problem, to redefine some more ideas, or to try a different prototype or test a new thing. So try to put all these aspects into this linear operating procedure the way that we're used to is just not going to work. So you have to kind of accept, as we talked about at the very beginning, a little bit of the chaos, because that mess is where the magic lies. Okay, it's usually a much more agile way of working. And again, it's a 6-stage design process. And I'll share with you the name of those process or the stages, and then I'll go into each one. Yes, definitely putting together a big jigsaw. That's a good way to put it. So you're going to understand, empathize, synthesize, ideate, prototype, and test. Now again, don't have to memorize those. Just putting the words out there, and I'm going to go through each one. So first is understand. The most relevant tasks for this phase are to identify the opportunity, find your why, prepare to explore the how. Now, as much as you might jump around from phase to phase later, it's really important to start here. And again, as easy as it might sound, it can be really difficult to recognize something about your life or create an awareness of yourself that you want to explore. So this definition, starting off here, helps you to focus and maintain a sense of accountability to yourself. So that's the first phase. The second phase is to observe. And this is all about practice. I'm just realizing now I used American spelling, so sorry. So in the observe phase, you're looking at practicing self-empathy. You're looking at data collection. And you're also looking at listing any possible assumptions or biases that you might have about the situation or the solution. And the reason that you list those out is to keep yourself aware and also away from them for now. Because again, we want to be careful we're not jumping into that solution phase too soon. Now again, most people, myself included, will incorrectly assume they're already empathizing with themselves because they acknowledge, well, I'm not happy with my current situation and I know how I feel. But it's really crucial to understand why you're feeling that way, okay? So the way that I have done it is I like to collect data on myself through tracking. And this might come from all sorts of different sources. This might come from calendars, the song history on my Spotify, the data on my health app. I mean, just think of all the different ways we're tracking ourselves. It's so interesting, isn't it? But this data really helps me to predict outcomes and explore patterns that I see. You might also, like for emotional well-being, there's lots of apps out there that allow you to collect information on how you're feeling that day. There's journal apps where you can look for keywords and so forth. So again, you can kind of go back and look. Like I remember there was this downward trend I was having a few years back. I was feeling super depressed, not really like going through, and I've gone through therapy and things, and so I kind of had recognized this in the past, but this was my most recent one. Felt really isolated, and I also felt like I lacked a lot of support. Plus, I was coming out of a breakup, so it was just this really bad time. But I only really noticed why I was feeling the way I was feeling because I could look back on some of that data. Otherwise, I would have just been like, oh, I'm not feeling great, and left it at that. So I would recommend starting a journal for anybody. I think journals are magical and fantastic, but I also understand that's not really for everybody. So there's apps for anything. Maybe it's for food logging, emotions logging, generic trackers where you're just tracking what you're counting every day. But somehow, some way, collect your data, avoid making emotional observations about yourself, okay, by using that data. There's a wonderful gal, I'm going to write her name in the chat. Her name is Georgia Lupi. She has a TED Talk about her book called Dear Data, where her and a gal pal whose name I'm forgetting tracked a bunch of different random datas, but they did it in a very interesting and simple visual way. Might be quite inspirational, might want to check it out. So phase 3 is the synthesize phase. At this point, you've collected all of your data. You understand kind of how you got here. Okay, you've got some structural insights that you need to define now. So in this phase, you're looking to make sense of your information. You're looking to identify some key insights. Thanks, Julie. You're looking for alternative interpretations of the data or the problem. But again, you're also building more self-empathy. We're learning more about ourselves. We're actually, I call it self-empathy, but it's essentially part of self-awareness. You might even start learning why you're feeling the way you're feeling, but also how you got there. So most of my data, as I mentioned, is fairly digital. So I have the benefit of algorithms in the app doing some of that work for me. I can use filters and things to evaluate that data and pinpoint what's going on. But so again, this difficult time I was having a few years back, I figured out looking at my emotional needs and kind of evaluating myself. I was looking for someone who was close to me to be supportive. I had a need for making some priorities in my life because I was feeling very scattered and all over the place. And I also found I needed a way to celebrate success, even smaller ones. And these are not things I ever had considered before. Those were all things that just sort of happened or didn't happen. I never actually looked at it as something that I had a choice. So how you might do it is, again, using your apps or your journals or what have you, look for those recurring themes, look for those recurring trends. Start to notice, for example, like you're in your worst mood on a Tuesday and you figure out it's because you're not getting sleep on Mondays because you have a late class and you come back and you want to unwind and you stay up late watching terrible reality television. But obviously you need your sleep. So, what are we going to do? So this is where you start to think about this question, how I might, or this statement rather, how I might. For any of you who have done design thinking in the past or would do design thinking with an organization, this is the same as a how might we statement. And it's written very specifically in this way because, as you can see, it's not I should or I could, it's I might, which puts way less pressure on you to feel like it's a success or a failure. It's more of an exploration. So for the last example I just gave, how might I get better rest on Monday nights? Okay. Then that brings us into ideas. Whew, finally, this is the part that everyone likes to get to because now we get to start talking about solutions. And you're going to brainstorm those solutions. You might open up and explore the different directions for those solutions. You might add some details and decide what to bring forward. So by this point, things are getting really exciting. You're starting to feel a bit more clarity about what you can do, what you might get away from this challenge that you've been dealing with. This is the perfect time to bring all that energy out into a brainstorm. I'm sure many of you have done brainstorms in the past, but just as a reminder, brainstorms are anything goes. Nothing is a bad idea. Just get it out there. So the way I like to do this is I like to visualize. So I have my whiteboard behind me here, for example. I'll build a wall of sticky notes. I'll set a timer of like 10, 15 minutes, depending on how much time I have that day. And I spend that whole time writing ideas. Now, I might stop after 8 minutes, but I keep going until the timer is finished because after a minute of pause, I might have another idea come to mind. And then I start to feel like DJ Khaled and another one and another one. They just keep coming, okay? You keep doing that for the 10, 15 minutes. But then, and this is tricky for a lot of people, I walk away. I walk away from that whiteboard. I walk away out of this room and I give myself some time and space away from the problems that I've defined and the ideas that I have and just carry on with the rest of my life. But then what comes next is just amazing. It's like some sort of phenomenon. Like there should be a scientific name for it, but I don't think there is. The rest of the day, I have other ideas that kind of percolate in my brain while I'm washing the dishes or taking the dog for a walk or whatever. And then I just add them. Yeah, the penny drops. And I just add them to that wall. And a lot of times, those are the ideas during that incubation period. They're the best ones. So, for example, to talk about like that Tuesday bad mood one, like some of those ideas might be something like an act of self-care, writing a blog post that puts my feelings out into the world, or even when I was talking about that slump that I had a few years back right after a breakup, I thought about looking into therapy again, having a date night with myself. I had a date night with myself last night. In fact, I went to a concert at the 5 Points, which was fantastic. I haven't been to a concert in so long. So it's really, really great to have those ideas come through and you just add them, no judgments, just no silly ideas either. Maybe the idea is like, I'm going to need a spaceship to Mars. Just put it out there and see. Eureka moment, yes. So whatever's the best way for you to brainstorm, do that. Maybe it's stickies on a whiteboard. Maybe it's a mind map. Maybe it's just writing down a list. However, experiment with another way if what you're doing isn't working. Invite others to help you and add ideas. They might have some interesting thoughts on things. Like I had a problem the other day that I thought, oh, I don't want to do it like this. And my friend said, well, you don't have to. Why don't you do this? And I went, of course. So also, if you're the type of person where you're out and about, keep a notes app on your phone, bring a notebook with you, keep writing down those ideas for as long as you can, and let them sit, if you can, for a few days. I know that sounds insane. You want to solve this problem very quickly, but let it sit for as long as you can. Epiphany, yes. Notepad near the bed is genius because, oh my gosh, how many times do you lose sleep on ideas? It's so nuts. All right, we have a couple more to get through and a little bit of time, and I want to leave time for questions. So Next is prototyping. This sounds really super technical, but basically this is just your idea in a rough draft form. It doesn't have to be elaborate. It doesn't have to impress anybody, and it definitely is not perfect. It's just something that lets you try it out and interact with it. And keeping in mind there's no such thing as failure, because a failed prototype is not a waste of time. It's just adding insight into what doesn't work. So just go for it. Attempt to create a clearer understanding of what the solution is, and make a plan that can be attempted and record feedback on how it works. Okay? So I might start with one idea, add on others, so that if that one's not working, I eliminate that one that's not working and try something else. Years ago, when I was having that downtrend after the breakup, this is going to sound really lame, but it worked. I started taking selfies and sharing them on social media every single day, but with the context of this is a self-love experiment. And people were super supportive. They offered words of encouragement, and I didn't have to tell them I was going through a breakup. I didn't have to even tell them anything was wrong. I was just saying I'm trying to like love myself, trying to feel myself a little bit, and people were all about it, because people do like to collaborate. But then that stopped working for me. It felt really inauthentic. It was not something I was really about. So then I added something before bed, like a yoga or a facial mask or a massage, anything that made me feel good before going to bed. And you can do that too, of course. Just do it. That's really the best advice I can offer. Just do it. And you're either going to see results right away, or you won't see them at all. And so if an idea is not working, move on to the next. You might even find a way to like tweak that idea or your prototype to accommodate your needs a bit better. So again, if what you're doing is not working in general, maybe go back. Make sure you're solving the right problem. Meditation is fantastic. It's so tough to start, but it's so great once you get it. So now we're on to the last phase, which is, oh, I hope you're not visualizing right now. The last phase is testing. And so in the testing phase, you're like, what do you mean testing? I thought prototype. No, so a lot of people have a hard time understanding the difference between testing and prototyping. Think of prototyping as an experiment, and the testing as asking yourself if the solution is sustainable. Okay, so run a test of the prototype, look for feedback, likes, loves, learnings, longings. Based on that feedback, decide what's working and what doesn't. So for example, I started with the one idea, add others. Eventually I was filling up my day with all sorts of self-love and self-esteem, and it was really great. But then one by one, I eliminated different things. I mean, put it this way, you're going to feel really good about it, but don't be married to that solution, because your situation is going to change. It's no longer going to work. Bring it back to the previous stage. Maybe now you've replaced watching television after class with yoga to help you decompress, which is cool, and it worked until it didn't. So go back and explore in your ideation phase what other types of solutions that you might have. And that's really the magic and the thing that I love about design thinking, which is there's no failure without a purpose. So what comes next? I'm always looking for ways to experiment, ways to try and figure out how to better my life. Design thinking, as you can see, is a great framework for that. It's much more purposeful in designing the person that you really want to be, and understanding the person who you are and showing up authentically. So that whole self-awareness leads to self-confidence and self-affirmation. So even if it's deciding how to spend your night, deciding how to carve out a path for your career, it's a really great move, especially when you're in a place of uncertainty or apathy, or you're not really sure how to proceed. Good. I'm so happy to hear that, Majid. So it's your turn. I am curious what your questions are, what your ideas are, what your curiosities are. I'd love it in the chat if you could put either a question, maybe if you have an idea of how you can use this right now in your life, or curiosities that you have about design thinking or how to get started with something that you're trying to use. We have a few minutes left, so.
That's fantastic, Jessica. Thank you so much for that. Guys, if you have any questions for Jessica, please put in the chat box, or if you're brave enough, just unmute yourself and,
Yes.
ask Jessica. And we have a couple of minutes left. So, Jessica, thank you so much for that. I loved how at the start you said that design thinking is for everyone. So, for people who are not familiar with the terminology design thinking, they're probably associated with like graphic designer, product designs, or illustration design. I love how you just clarified that and said it's a process and it's a mindset. So, absolutely love that. And there's a lot of thank yous coming through. And guys, again, if you do have any questions for Jessica, please put in the chat box. Feel inspired? Great. And you definitely given us a great foundation for food for thought for the rest of today's sessions.
Good. And yes, I'll go ahead and pass along a PDF of these slides so that people can come back and refer to them as well. If you're feeling inspired and you want to share how it's inspiring you too, I'd love to hear it. I'm always curious how people are using it.
Oh.
Well, I'm just glad everyone got something out of it anyway. Career change, exciting. Ooh, I'm curious now, from what to what? Either you can unmute or put it yourself in the chat, I suppose, if you don't mind sharing.
Yeah.
Thanks, Norman, for your help.
Yeah, there's some great comments coming through there for you, Jessica.
Yes.
Wow.
A boring office job. Fantastic.
Fantastic. So, guys, just to make you aware that there are loads more exciting sessions for the rest of today. Like Jessica have laid down a great foundation on the topic of confidence, resilience, and leadership. So, straight after this, well, within 15 minutes, there is another one called The Future of Leadership in a Brave New World. Sounds exciting. So that is happening at 10:45, and then right through to 4:45 this afternoon, and then of course the finale for tomorrow. Okay, so we have some keynote speakers for tomorrow. So if you haven't registered for them, there is a live link for all of those sessions, and I will copy and paste the link into the chat box.
She's fantastic. Definitely check her out.
Yes, definitely. So if you can register on Handshake, if you're running out of time, you can just go into this website and click onto the Go Live link. And if you have any questions for Jessica after today's session, you can contact us and hopefully we can pass it on to you, Jessica.
No problem. Do we have a minute here? I have one question here that just came in.
Yes, of course.
Okay. It says, what other techniques would you combine design thinking with in the world of work? And that's a great question. I think it depends on your field of work, but most commonly design thinking and leadership go really well together, especially when trying to work in organizations that are creating changes. So for example, we work a lot with health organizations, and obviously more recently that's been very disrupted. So I would say leadership skills go really generically hand in hand, but it depends on your field of work, how you might actually look through that lens. So I hope that helps a little bit.
Great, thank you. And then also Rachel said, thanks Jessica, looking forward to implementing this in my design practice and personal life. Wow, that's good. Another one, he doesn't like an easier life. Which software you use?
Oh goodness. Well, my version of visualization, your version of visualization might be different. I don't use it in a scientific form. We visualize things in all sorts of different areas. We might use Figma, we might use Adobe XD, we might use Miro, Google Slides, but actual visualization is not something that is my strong suit, but it depends, I suppose, what type of visualization you're doing. Tableau, I know, is one I've used in the past, but I'm not an expert at it by any means. You're welcome. Thanks for that.
Well, guys, we will wrap up this first session of today then. Thank you so much again, Jessica, and thank you everyone for attending this session. And don't forget, there are there are another 5 today. So check out the website that I've just given you in the chat box, and I look forward to seeing you guys again in the next one. Okay, so thank you so much.